So thank you so much for being here, and I'm really just going to turn it over to you. But for my students here in the classroom and at home, I'm so pleased to introduce you to Trinh Mai, an artist from California. And she's going to introduce us to her work and to her story. And so thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. When COVID happened, I was like, oh, this is kind of my life anyway, just like being in the studio by myself. Like it's like a mad science lab, just experimenting with everything. And it's really the art and these gatherings that pull me out of my madness. So I appreciate y'all having me. So I think I'd like to start with a short clip that will describe the events that had first inspired my work about family history and making work about the refugee experience. So I'm going to try and do this. All right. This is why I paint. Buttons are not my friends. Okay, let's do My grandmother, my grandfather, and their 10 children all lived in Saigon, where my mother was born. In 1975, when they got word that the communists were coming, everyone rushed to the docks.
Many of them have said that they were left out in the evacuation.
Oh no. Sorry. Maybe to save time, I'll just describe it to you. Stop share. Okay. So this documentary, the full length of the documentary is on my website, trinmai.com. Dr. Anna can give that to you later. But it talks about during 1975, my parents, my mom's side of the family fled Saigon when the communists had taken over South Vietnam. And they had rushed to the docks, so nobody had any plan except we needed to leave. My mom remembers army tanks just rolling in down the street, and they just grabbed their bags. My grandmother had prepared by making each one of her 10 children these backpacks that were made of rice sacks and army rucksacks. And in each of them, my mom remembers there being a couple packages of ramen and some clothing. And so these children, I just imagine that's like another project that I have to make that I haven't had time for. But let me go to my presentation actually to show you some pictures. Okay, slideshow. Sorry, it helps me to talk to myself. Okay. All right, minimize. All right, here we go. So here's my mom here. This is her baptism in 1959. That's my grandmother's handwriting. I so appreciate the handwritings on these family photos. So art's been a way for me to help search into my family history, to tell the stories of the Vietnamese American experience, and also these shared refugee immigrant experiences. So there's all these kids here. These dolls were very special. My grandfather had actually taught English in America, which I learned after my grandmother had passed away. I had assumed that the first time they stepped foot on American soil was as refugees after the fall of Saigon, but it turned out as my grandfather visited America a few times for conferences, and he brought back these dolls. And my aunties remember them smelling good. When they saw this photo, it was so interesting to kind of watch these memories kind of flash in their eyes, and they told the story of these dolls with such endearment in their eyes. And they talked about how good they smelled. And they said, Vietnamese dolls didn't smell that way, you know, like that baby powder smell. I don't know if y'all know or remember that. This is my family here in Vietnam. Here's my grandmother. So she passed away in 2014. This photo was taken in the 40s. And she was the person who told me the most about my family history. So I really thank you all for inviting me to do this, because this is how I keep her alive. This is how I can continue, help them continue on their legacy, and just kind of share in the inheritance by talking about them, making work about them, and then being able to share it. So I feel extremely blessed and privileged to do so. So here's my grandmother and me in Huntington Beach, where I spent my first couple years of life. My parents moved to Bay Area to find work during the tech boom. So I lived with her and my aunts and uncles. So here's the photo that I used for my Begins with Tea series. So I owe such a huge amount of inspiration to her. So these are actually her used tea bags. So when I would visit her at her house, we would sit there at the dining room table, and over a pot of tea, she would just tell me all these family stories. So this was the way that I could encapsulate our time together, and just like really try to remember all of the things she was telling me, so that I could pass them on to future generations, to you all. And so all the food material here, there's over 200 of them. All the food material came from her pantry. So these are ingredients that are often used in Vietnamese cuisine, and also thinking about how every living thing starts with a seed. So I was really interested in that, and encapsulating these memories into her used tea bags. So there's 6 generations of photos here, which I can't even believe that we were able to preserve them after the war. Because during the escape, if you as a South Vietnamese resident had any kind of, or if any of the residents had any affiliation with South Vietnam, you would be killed or imprisoned, or severely, you would just be risking your life. So what people did was they burned documents, birth certificates, any information that would link you to South Vietnam, and that included photos. And so we're extremely fortunate to be able to preserve these, and I wanted to help continue that. So these began as an experiment, actually. We were living in this tiny little studio, and I was like, my paintings are usually like 4 by 4 feet. And I was like, I don't even know what to do. And these tea bags were so beautiful, and I had saved them. And my grandmother would be like, pick these tea bags up. They're getting moldy. Your aunt's going to throw them away. So she was like such a huge supporter of my work. But yeah, I ended up with about 200 of them because there were so many beautiful photos. So yeah, art for me usually starts with the story first, and then these materials are really important in helping to tell that story. So here's an image from the Family Tree series, which is also on the documentary as well as my website. There's about 60, I think like 64 of these. They are made on the pages of my late great aunt's prayer book. And I physically tore out the pages and worked on them, which you know, people, like a lot of people are like, I can't believe you did that. You should have made copies. But for me, it's the object itself that holds these stories, these memories, and this history. So it's really important for me to share them. So here's my aunt with the doll. This is another aunt, like one of my youngest aunties with the doll. And when she saw this photo, yeah, that's when she started telling these stories. So it's really interesting how photography can just open up, or art in general can just open up people to talk about these things, to talk about the difficult things like war and you know, escaping war and survival, and there's really difficult things to talk about. But when they see themselves in photographs, they want to tell about it. It's kind of like when there's a group photo and we know that we're in the photo, we look for ourselves first, and then we kind of recollect what the situation was, where we were at, who we were with, what we were doing there. So it does the same thing it did the same thing for my family. So I would encourage that, you know, maybe flip through some old photo albums. I know today it's all about like swiping and looking through photos, but you'll be surprised at how many stories will come out of just a photo if you just sit there with your loved one. And, you know, most of the time, I didn't even need to ask questions. I just sat there and looked at it and the stories would come. So that's a revelation. Here's a piece called Boat Folks. So this is hand embroidery, which is like a very meditative process for me. Photos of my auntie and me, which you can barely see. We're right there on the boat. This is, the flag is made with a rice sack that my grandmother had given me from her fabric collection. So this kind of ties into the story I was telling you earlier about how she had made those backpacks with the rice sack. So all of it just kind of ties together. It's like there's these materials and these stories, and they all kind of get stored in my mind, and then they just start kind of fitting together. Like when you write a paper, maybe you have these thoughts and you have this idea and it's just kind of a jumbled mess, but then they start kind of dovetailing one to the other. That's how I approach my practice. That's why there's so many mediums. One of the questions I get asked most often is like, what kind of work do you make? Like, what's your medium? And it's just, sometimes I feel like I have creative ADD until I see my work in a show. And then I'm like, okay, like there's a common thread that runs through here. But yeah, that's one of the things that I deal with, that I struggle with. So yeah, and at the end of the month, we'll be having a studio tour that I'm really excited about, a studio visit. So I'll talk more about those rice sacks and show them to you. Okay, so here is my grandmother and my youngest auntie at the refugee camp in Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania in 1975. I love her little feet there and like just flip-flops thrown aside. So my family, there were 4 refugee camps in the United States, and I'll move from east to west as if we're traveling from you to me. So they were Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania, Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, and Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, which is North San Diego County. So here is a huge lesson I learned. So I have a friend who is she's a Vietnamese American history scholar. She had told me that one of the refugee camps was in Texas. So for years, since like I started doing art talks, I've been mentioning this refugee camp in Texas. And just yesterday, and this is shameful, so I apologize, I researched to find out where is it in Texas, like what military base. And I found out that it's not in Texas, that it's actually in Florida. So I was so disappointed in myself. So this is just a note, do your research, do your own research. And you know, it was someone I trusted. This is what she does. And, you know, we're humans, so we get things wrong, but I should have done my own research. So just wanted to like add that little note. So what was interesting about this photo is the perspective that came with it. So I asked my grandmother what it was like in the refugee camp, and she was like, oh my goodness. She had, okay, so one of my uncles didn't actually make it. So there were 9 children, and she had so many people to take care of, and they were in this state of limbo. They were waiting for sponsorship, and she just had a horrible time. It was crowded there. You know, you didn't know who was who, so you had to watch your things, the very little that they were able to bring with them. And then I asked my mom what the refugee camp was like, and she was like, I had so much fun. She worked at the rec center, so she was checking out sports equipment and like, you know, making friends. And so very different perspectives that all make up this refugee experience. And I love those different perspectives. So here's my grandmother's Vietnam ID, which we discovered under her bed in my grandfather's little blue suitcase after the day we buried my grandmother. I was just sitting on the floor of her bedroom and I was like, what is that under her bed? And I pulled it out and there were all of these IDs. So I was really drawn to these fingerprints right here. So this is Ngan Tai Mat Ngan Tai Chai, which is left thumbprint, right thumbprint. So I decided to take that and kind of mess around with it. So these are my fingerprints here on paper. And I have this memory of my uncle visiting from France. And I used to have this little blue suitcase with all these art materials in them. And it made me feel like I would carry this plastic blue suitcase around to like represent, I guess. Like I thought if I could carry it around, people would know I'm an artist or something. And he asked me, "Con ka mấy hoa tay," which means how many flowers of the fingers do you have? And what he meant were these little whorls. So the whorls are the flowers. And I was so excited because I was like, oh my goodness, please let me have at least one. And we sat there and we looked through each finger, and I have 6 of them. And so I was like so excited about that because I'm like, oh yay, I am an artist, as if that was like the sign. So I started dabbing my fingers onto this paper, and it was a day that I was really missing my grandmother, and it became this. And I'm telling you, these things in my practice happen all the time, just through the process. I had her ID on my studio table. And I just kind of wanted to play. So I started layering it. And I've made one other portrait with my fingerprints, but this was it's like kind of one of those ideas that I can't even take credit for because it kind of came sporadically. It wasn't like I had, developed it in my brain. It just happened. I know that sounds a little romantic, but things like that do happen all the time when things coincide, and they make more sense for me that way. So this is a photo here, a painting, the first painting I did about my family history. So here's my mom on top, her 9 brothers and sisters, and this is Bakung, who didn't make it. So it's a diptych, which is 2 panels. And this is the rope ladder that they had to climb across. So it's an abstracted rope ladder there. So these 2 panels are moving them from east to west. And so my mom remembers when they were floating at sea. Okay, so when I asked her, she was like, we were at sea for 30 days because the boat that they got on, which you'll see in the documentary, it broke down. It wasn't even supposed to be like on the water. It was actually docked for repair. And magically somebody was able to fix the boat. So they set sail, and then in the middle of the ocean, the boat broke down. So they were just floating aimlessly. At that time, there was word, like there were military ships that were at sea, just kind of waiting for the refugees to come because they knew what was going on. So a US Navy ship came to pick my family up, and they threw across this rope ladder, and one by one, they crawled across on their hands and knees over this rope ladder, like overlooking these deep waters to get to the US boat. So my mom, I asked her how long, and she said 30 days. So that's the name, that's the title of this painting. Okay. So after my grandma passes away, in that little blue suitcase, my grandfather's blue suitcase, we find his travel journal. And so this is his writing: left Saigon, April 30th, 1975. That's the day that Saigon fell. So the day that we lost our country. And then it says, arrived in Subic Bay, which is the first refugee camp they landed in the Philippines, May 8th. So they had only they had only been on the water for 8 days. Not only, I don't want to say like it wasn't difficult, but my mom remembered 30 days, and my grandfather's notes say 8 days. So again, research, but this was like not possible to research. I guess I could have asked my grandmother, but I hadn't thought about it. But it wasn't until later on that we had found this. So from 2003, that painting was made. I found this in 2014. So that's 11 years of knowing that 30 days was a fact when in fact it was not. So that's really interesting. So these discoveries are really exciting to me. My mom remembers when she arrived at the refugee camp, she had said salt never tasted so good, because they had been eating like rice and just such bland food on the boat. And she just remembers loving the taste of salt, which is something that we so often like disregard. You know, we just kind of throw some into our food and we don't really think about it. And yeah, salt. So yeah, okay, so this is my husband's father. And these are the original documents of his release when he was imprisoned in the re-education camp, you know, internment camp, labor camp. There's a lot of different names for them, but they're all death camps pretty much. And he was imprisoned for several years. And we were able to obtain this original paperwork, which is unbelievable. So we've had this since 2001, and I didn't know what to do about it. And there is, I don't think it's on this page, but there's another page where it's typewritten and says violation, thoit, which is violation. And then in handwriting, it says against communism. And that's it. Like, I was like, the only violation, against communism. And so he was held underground in a cell that was where the ceiling was lower than his height. So he had the option of either laying down, sitting down, or standing up and hunching over. And he survived it. So I took that photo and I enlarged it. This is 4 by 5 feet. And you'll see all of these war wounds here. There's 17 of them, because he was shot 17 times during the war and survived. And at one point, the blast was so strong, it was like during heavy fire, and this gunshot blasted him into the water, into the Mekong River, and that river carried him away from enemy forces. And it's like, that's another project I want to work on. I mean, the fact that water carried him to safety, like the water saved him. It's these stories are just unbelievable. And I feel like a need to document them, because this is still happening. This is the world has not changed. War is always happening. The will that we have to survive and to fight for our people, for our people, for our freedom, this is happening now, and it's never stopped. It's just now, fortunately, we're able to see it clearer because things are exposed. People are exposed, governments are exposed, injustice is exposed. And so in art, I feel this very burdensome responsibility to help do that. This is a detail of it. I thought about the growth that can sprout from these wounds, right? So we all suffer from some sort of affliction, so spiritual, emotional, physical afflictions, and there is like potential growth that can sprout from them. So I thought, what if there was real growth that could come out of these wounds? So I built a little planter. You could see these, the writing here. This is, they're copies of those papers, those release papers that I showed you. Tree bark, and I took rainwater from Vietnam and tears that I actually shed for him, and I rubbed them into the paper until they tore out these war wounds. So these are 3 of the 17 of them. And so I was just thinking about them, like, this man was tortured because he was seen as the other, and whoever these others were, they didn't feel like he deserved to call this place home. And so just, again, history repeating itself. And I'm extremely excited because I'm doing a project with UC Berkeley School of Law in their journal. They have an Asian American law journal, and it started in 1993, and they've never published artwork. And I sent some work in and was like, I know this is what you don't do, but we're kind of doing the same thing, but in different languages. And I mean, all of my work right now, well, most of it is about, well, maybe all of it is about immigration. So is this in the way that it's affecting the Vietnamese people? Are you open to it? And they were. So I am extremely excited how art is now seen as this, like, legit way of transferring information and documenting history. So this is another clip that you can watch. Sorry, I just don't want to try to play that video again. Okay, so these are more documents that I found in the Southeast Asian Archive at UC Irvine. So there were letters that were written from 1981 to 1996, written by family members in search for their missing loved ones. So here's the name, Le Mai Xuân Ha, date of or year of birth. This writing here, it's very strange because this is my mother's writing, but it's not actually her writing. It looks just like hers though. So this was written by a priest. So what happened was these letters would get sent out, and then these organizations would then write letters to other organizations. They didn't have email at the time, so it was all done through the mail, and they're like, have you seen this person? So here's a photocopy of her photo that the family would send in. Here's her name. Here's all the information about her. They left Vietnam on July 23rd, 1985. Only the leader Thai arrived at Site 2 Dong Lek. No news of others so far. So this particular child, she had left with 14 other children, according to the letter, and there was only the leader that was in charge of these children arrived. And when I first read the letter, it made me so angry because I'm like, why would you leave them? Like, what? You were in charge of them. The parents trusted you with these children, and then you are the only one that arrived at the site, and like you left the children there. And I started making up all these stories, like my own narrative to attach in order to deal, right? It's like when we see injustice, it's like anger, right? That might be one of, or sadness, that might be one of the first emotions I know I feel is anger. And then I had to check myself and realize that I don't know the story. Nobody knows the end of this story except for Le Mai Swan and this leader Thai. So maybe they didn't make it, and maybe he was able to escape, to search for help, to hopefully find somebody to go back and help them. Like, I really don't know this story. So I really had to check myself on that. And these are the things that I go through when I do the work about war, because it's so heavy. So here is one piece that I did in the Quiet series to honor these people who went missing. So as you can see, this is Le Mai, but I had to change her hair because, you know, we tried to reach out to the family members and didn't have any contact with them because it had been so long, numbers had changed. And so I had to change some of the information on my installation, and also her hair, making her a little younger. So there was like a lot of things I had to be careful about, which was really difficult. So this will all tie together. This is an image of my great grandfather's funeral. So here are, here's, if you see those white sashes that they're wearing on their heads, those are called kentang. And they, family members of the departed will wear those to acknowledge their loved one. Here's another one. Look at this child. The only one looking at the camera, well, maybe, but this child right here. And here's this woman just weeping. And I just thought, these children they are experiencing what death is. And I just wondered how they make sense of it being that young. So this is what the entire installation looks like. There's 93 of these, or 94 of these. I had the idea that I would make 100 of them, and my heart just couldn't take it anymore, because as I was reading the letters, I had retyped the letters on the fabric, and I lived it with them. I lived through it with them. And I've heard of method acting, and I'm like, these actors are crazy. Like, why would you like, sorry for being judgy if there's any actors out there. But before this, I was like, why would they put themselves through that? Like Tom Hanks in Castaway, like, why would he put himself through that, to live through, such turmoil, to just play this role? And I didn't understand, because I'm, not an actor, nor would I want to put myself in that situation to live through such horrendous circumstances. But as I was working on these and reading these letters, I saw myself in the jungle with them, because so all of these individuals, they escaped, well, minus one, this girl in the middle, Nguyen, she escaped on boat. This is my uncle, Bak Hung, who went missing. We actually don't know what happened to him, but all the rest of them escaped on foot. So they escaped from Vietnam through Cambodia into Thailand on foot. That's 3 countries. And so I imagined them being in the jungle, and I could smell like the dampness, of the earth beneath their feet. I can hear them like walking gingerly on dead leaves, like to not, draw attention to them, because they were in hiding. There were rebels and Viet Cong like out in these jungles. And so they were, in hiding, and I could see them underneath the canopies, and the light just kind of shining through the thick canopy of trees. Just all of these visions just came to me as I was reading the letter. So it brought me right into it with them. And it just made me realize, maybe these actors don't choose to do it. Maybe it just happens, because I didn't plan for that. I didn't necessarily want, I mean, that's like a whole nother level of compassion to walk through it with them. And this project allowed me to do that. And it was horrifying. And so that's why I stopped at 92 or 94. I aimed for 100, and at 94, I was like, my heart cannot handle it. I cannot see this anymore, because every time I would paint them, these images would arrive. Like, these are sisters. They're two sisters here. And here so you can kind of see the handwriting, the typewriting, I mean, which I used my youngest auntie's typewriter that I inherited. So again, like the objects and the materials are all part of telling the story. And here on her forehead, I had retyped what their mother had written. She writes, "In the spirit of humanitarianism for the refugee people, please help us find our daughters." It's crazy, right? So I had used ink to paint their portraits, and the ink bled into this cotton as if it was like sweat or blood or tears on a handkerchief. And it was just like so profound. So I really lived it through them. This is my uncle back home. I just wanted to show you a photo of him. He was only 16 when he went missing, a child, you know. So and these are just questions that I wrote to him. So I kind of merged the retyping of the letters with my own letters to them. So, you know, what things did you see? Did you hear? You know, these questions will never be answered. This is a painting called On Our Way, 2007. And this is my husband on his brother's back when they escaped the war, also on foot. He was born in the Bac-Lieu province, where his father was a governor, and for 2 terms. And his family escaped in 1979 when he was just a baby. And so he was a governor, and then when they arrived in America, he worked in the farms with other immigrant families in the oil fields. So yeah, just starting over. And I just learned this as I was preparing for this talk, actually, so thank y'all. He had told me that during the escape, he got extremely ill because he was just a baby. And his father almost called the whole trip off. They almost turned back for fear that Hien wouldn't make it. And so here they are with like 10 people. I think there were more than 10 people, but for sure 10 people. And they were going to turn around because this little baby was sick. And when Hien had told me that, I was like, turn around to where? Like, you can't go back home. Where would you go? You know, so more questions. So I'm thinking about war and war wounds. This is a series called War Wounds, and how these wounds, again, like whatever wounds they are, physical, emotional, they all heal at different rates, right? So some wounds heal completely, some wounds heal, but if left untreated, they can open back up. And in this, while I was working on this, I realized that some wounds might not ever heal, and it broke me. I was like, well, what do you mean some of them don't heal? Because our natural human instinct is heal that wound, because we don't actually know which ones might heal and which ones might not. So we take the chance, and we want to live, we want to survive, and we want to live. So we play our part in trying to heal those wounds, and in doing so, we might help others heal their wounds. So that was like a really heartbreaking truth, that some wounds don't heal. Yeah, so these are the things that art teaches me. Some lessons, amazing, you know, well, all of them are, but some are just ones that maybe might be easier not knowing, but truth is good. For me, truth is all good. So I need to know these things. Here's one of a gaping open wound. And so, you know, the works inform me as I inform it. You know, I think I depend more on the work informing me because my hands are being obedient, right? I'm like making the stuff, but like when these revelations come, they really just open it up to something that really transcends art. Like it just becomes these lessons that I need to learn, these things I need to know, these truths I need to discover. And it just happens to be that my hands help me find them. So this I also learned, here's, oh no, okay. So this is acrylic. This was at Oceanside Museum of Art, and one of the docents emailed me and was like, your wounds are dripping. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but if you could come fix it. And I was like, no, that's part of the installation. But I used just this watercolor because you know how when your wound starts healing, it starts getting all that like liquid stuff. So I learned that it's called weeping, which is amazing. Yeah, so our wounds weep. So I was really excited about that. Again, somebody else, I learned that from someone during the process. So here's how they were displayed at Oceanside Museum of Art. I really like how they're kind of like, just kind of trickling down here. Yeah, and then here they are. Oh, that's a bad photo, sorry. This is at Grand Central Arts Center. So here they are just kind of like spanning a wall. I think it was like 25 feet. So it's a different kind of movement. Yeah, that's what I love about installation work. It really, yeah, like it plays with the space more. So here's a painting that took 2 years to finish. I began it in 2017, and it was actually a week after my closest friend passed away from breast cancer, and I just couldn't touch it. I ended up finishing it 2 years later. So this was actually about letting her go. So you can kind of see her here. I'm kind of holding her in my hands and I'm letting her go. And in time, the painting changes, right? So we experience different things. And then it became a prayer for liberation. Yeah, for the people who are incarcerated, those who are detained. And it was just the plea for liberation there. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Here's like a close-up of that. And the buffalo represents like the weight of the world, right? So as I'm letting Kelly go, she's kind of flying off of this arch, which is like an arch of the Fibonacci sequence, nature's perfect order. And the buffalo just represents the weight of the world. So she's free from this weight, you know, from her pain and suffering. So just thinking about freedom and what that might be and how I can help, you know, bring some to light. Here's how it was displayed in San Diego Art Institute. So these pieces are called For We Are Called to Freedom. And that's how they look, just like white. I hung these up and they were like, so there's these tiny little red crosshairs or crosses here. And this is how they look from the front, just like plain white paper. And then when you move and the lighting changes, these birds are revealed. So these are Vietnamese greenfinches and American goldfinches because we are both, and some refuse to see that. So I was thinking about the people in hiding. So thinking about those who escaped during the war, hiding in the jungles. We actually lived in this building that was right, this is in Orange County, that was right across the street from these storage units. And we had witnessed ICE trucks rolling up, raids happening because there were Mexican families that were hiding in these storage units. And so I was just like thinking about like what it means to have to hide to preserve your life, you know? And so that's why the birds kind of appear and disappear. Here's another one. This is an American goldfinch here, and you can see those little crosshairs. So those represent a lot, like a kind of stamp of courage right on their hearts. It represents faith. The Red Cross that was actually created to help those who were caught in conflict. And then little crosshairs too. That was another revelation that broke my heart, is thinking about these birds being hunted. And so those became little crosshairs that were aiming right for their heart, which was, I know it's a little dark. I don't mean to be that way, but that happens. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm just amazed at the way those things occur. So here's, I got the privilege, I had the privilege of working with the International Rescue Committee's peacemakers, and here are some of the refugee students. These are refugee high school students from all over the Middle East, from all over Africa, Southeast Asia, and here they've just discovered the birds. And I love that photo so much. And I think we only have, okay, we have like just a few minutes, right? So I'm gonna, you'll see this at Gallery 51, and I'm gonna stop here. Thanks everyone, bye.